So typography and typeface refer to the fonts that you use within your publication. There are tons of details and intricacies involved with any font, typeface, or selection, but here I'm just going to give you the basics, enough to get you moving and doing complicated things, but hopefully not so much that you get bogged down by being too focused on typeface. So for our purposes here, I'm going to break type down into 4 sections. Serifs, sans serifs, special or novelty fonts, and font design and implementation. We'll primarily focus on serifs and sans serifs because that's what you'll need most in your publications. Serifs are fonts that have small, typically tapered strokes at the points. These strokes are called serifs. Serif is probably derived from the Dutch word schrief, meaning dashed line. Today, some of the most widely recognized fonts are serif fonts. Times New Roman, designed specifically for the Times of London, and Garamond, Caslon, and countless other fonts are serifs. Serifs are particularly useful for, although not strictly used for, body copy, which is the text that makes up the majority of the page in most cases, and is where the story, feature, or text is held. The serif's major advantage as far as body copy is concerned is its legibility. Even when printed in small sizes, serifs are easy for readers to make out and read. Stylistically speaking, serifs can be used to connote 2 main feelings that can be helpful to keep in mind when you're designing your pages. Serifs, in all their austerity and lack of ostentation, can really emphasize the minimalist design of a page. The stark contrast between white space on a page and the crisp, clean lines of typeface can have a powerful effect and draw the reader into your content. White space here is the space between elements in your page. We'll talk about this in relation to various topics through this course. Now, white space can be employed to achieve many effects. It can increase or reduce legibility, can signify importance, and can parrot the tone of your publication when used effectively. Take this Pulitzer Prize-winning example from the Plain Dealer out of Cleveland, Ohio. This was their front page when basketball phenom LeBron James left the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2010. The page is highly minimal, featuring nothing but a cutout of LeBron and the word "gone," which has left plenty of room to breathe, and is conspicuous enough not to draw the attention to itself, but designed with such integrity and thoughtfulness as to magnify the image's significance. The Plain Dealer cover is the perfect example of what a serif headline can do, because it performs both main functions so perfectly. Serifs can be exploited to accentuate a page's minimalism, as well as for emotional effect. Partially due to their minimalist nature, and partially due to their association as a basic, standard font style, and the fact that they're so widely used, serif fonts can convey great solemnity or the grave, serious nature of a story. So let's look at these front pages from across the United States on September 12th, the day after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in New York. Now, this was an incredibly painful and shocking event that sent ripples throughout the hearts of Americans and people across the entire world. The use of a serif font here conveys the tone of the event much better than sans serif does. The gobsmacking, absolutely astounded American populace is embodied in these quiet, inoffensive, plain letters. It's no wonder the serif font is often employed when papers mourn deaths of groups or people who have made significant contributions to society. This Herald Sun front page mourns the death of Nelson Mandela. Note the clean, unobtrusive serif font at the bottom. Serifs' power comes from how understated they are, but that's not to say that they can't be used for stories that are less doom and gloom. Now, sans serif fonts, now that you know what serifs are specifically, are exactly what they sound like. They're fonts without those extra strokes at the points. Sans serif fonts differentiate from serif fonts in that way, as well as a few other key aspects. For one, serif fonts tend to come in larger font families. This means that you'll often be able to find one font that has various weights or strokes applied to it. And strokes or weights here refers to the thickness of the lines that make up a font. Futura PT, which is available on Adobe Creative Cloud, has 16 variations on its font family, ranging from Futura Light, with a very light, thin stroke, not much wider than 1 point, to Futura Extra Bold Oblique, a font based on the same stroke, but yielding massively different appearances and connotations with each style. Look at Futura Heavy Oblique. Add a red box to the background, and now you've got yourself the Supreme logo, which is nothing more than a very specific font choice. Sans serifs also tend to have a more consistent stroke weight throughout each letter. Let's look at Alta Haas Grotesque and compare it to Times New Roman. See how both lowercase and uppercase A's in Times New Roman have very thin strokes at one part? Now compare that to the sans serifs Alta Haas. The stroke weight throughout is almost identical there. This can also be an advantage for headlines. The boldness of the sans serif font stands out in clear contrast with white pages. And sans serif fonts can be so bold, it's almost like they're shouting. So let's think. What's something that you'd be likely to shout? Maybe if you were going to war? Sans serif fonts have a big, boisterous, attention-grabbing style that's appropriate for shouting, screaming, and announcing war and other huge events to people, whether they're passing newsstands in the 1940s or checkout counters today. That's the same reason tabloids use big, blaring headlines and sans serif fonts. They grab your attention, and they're really good at keeping it. Now that's, again, not to say that sans serif fonts are only good for shouting. Like I mentioned, sans serif font families are greatly variegated. Just as they can shout, they can whisper too. Fonts like Bebas New have light strokes that are minimalist in a more modern sense, being stripped of excess or decoration. Now, fonts like this, when they're paired appropriately with a complementary design, they can appear very luxurious and modern. Now, I'm not going to give too much attention to specialty or novelty fonts for a few reasons. First off, they're risky. Fonts that have special effects or features can be helpful in setting the tone for a story, but they similarly run the risk of making you look like a total amateur. Readers aren't accustomed to reading them, and what might be very clear to you as the designer might not be as clear to your readership. Typeface is an important element of design, but when you use a novelty or a specialty font, you run the risk of crossing over into decoration. And a very important distinction to make is that we do not decorate pages, we design them. So, if you do choose a specialty font, have a clear reason for why you're using it, and ask yourself if your standard serif and sans serif fonts can't be manipulated to achieve the effect you're looking for. You'll also want to look at the page as a whole. If you're counting on a specialty font to bring the entire page together, you might need to rework the page as a whole to be more cohesive on its own. Which sucks, don't get me wrong. Nobody wants to redesign an entire page. But would you rather put the time and effort into that and have your pages come out looking sharp, or would you rather use a specialty font and risk the integrity of your publication? So, what fonts should you use for your publication, and how many should you use? Well, I will say this, and I'll probably say it many more times throughout these lessons, but when it comes to page design, less is more. It's better to have little variation and a style that's consistent than too much variation and a lack of stylistic cohesion. So, how many should you use? So I'd suggest starting off with 2 font families, one that's a serif and one that's sans serif. So you'll probably end up with, out of the serif font, regular, oblique, bold, and bold oblique, so 4. And then out of the sans serif, you'll end up with light, regular, oblique, bold oblique, and heavy, and then possibly other versions, such as a condensed version, more obliques, or super light strokes, and so on. So already with only 2 font families, you've got upwards of 10 typefaces that you can use throughout your publication. All 10 typefaces conform to 2 families, so there's a clear sense of unity, yet variation in tone and stroke weight to add emphasis and fit specific areas, as well as keeping the page from blending into one big jumble of a single monolithic font.